"You are going to tell me your name one of these Sundays," said Susanna Bell, "or I shall be obliged to invent one for you, and I warn you, it will not be flattering." The man walking beside her in the plain brown coat kept his eyes on the lane and said, "Thorn, Thorn." "It is my name," he said, which was true and was not the whole of it, and he was already, 4 steps later, ashamed of himself. It was the 3rd Sunday in Lent, and the light was going out of the sky over the Oakenshaw Valley in long bars of gold and grey, and Adrian Thorn, 9th Duke of Oakenshaw, master of 40,000 acres, 11 villages, and a house so large that his own mother had never seen the whole of it, was walking a lace-mender home from Evensong with a hymn book under his arm and mud on his boots, and would not have changed places with the king. He had not planned any of it. He had come to the valley in January, 3 weeks after his brother's funeral, with the title barely cold on his shoulders and a bundle of accounts under his arm that did not, however he arranged them, come out. Rents up, repairs down. Poor relief, 1/3 of what it had been in his father's time, and the population not smaller, and his brother's steward, Mr. Vance, writing to him in a beautiful hand from the estate office, assuring him that the tenantry were content, prosperous, and much attached to the family. So Adrian had put on the plain brown coat that he had worn at Cambridge, and had come down to the valley alone, on foot, and had taken a room at the Fleece in Oakenshaw village under the name Thorn, which was his own, and had said that he was a clerk come to look at the timber. He had meant to stay a week. That first Sunday he had gone to church, because a stranger who does not go to church is remarked upon, and he had sat at the back, and he had listened to the vicar preach for 40 minutes on the duty of contentment, and afterwards, in the porch in the rain, he had seen a young woman of perhaps 24 in a grey cloak helping an old woman down the step, and he had heard her say, quite clearly, to somebody who had asked her whether she was going up to the hall to see the new Duke ride out, "I have no interest in seeing the new Duke ride out. He has not troubled to come and see us." Adrian had walked home behind her in the rain that night at a distance of 40 yards, and had not been able to think of one word to say in his own defence. The 2nd Sunday he had carried the old woman's basket. The old woman was Mrs. Bell, who was 81 and stone deaf, and who took him, after one long, shrewd, sideways look, entirely for granted, and her granddaughter Susanna was a lace-mender, which is to say that she sat by a window 10 hours a day repairing the flounces of women who would not have let her through the front door, and got 7 pence a yard for it, and had been doing it since she was 14. She had told him this on the 3rd Sunday without the smallest self-pity, as a plain fact of the weather. She had also told him, over 11 Sundays in that lane, between the church gate and her cottage door, a very great deal more. That the bridge at Netherfold had been down since Michaelmas, and the children went round by the ford, and one of them had nearly gone in when the water was up in November. That old rider, who had been 40 years a hedger on the estate, had been turned off his cottage at Christmas because he could no longer work, and was living in his son's back kitchen at Ashby, and was ashamed of it, and would not go to church any more. That Mr. Vance, the steward, had raised the rent on the 7 cottages in Water Row by 2 shillings in the year the roofs went, and that everybody knew he took a shilling in the pound from any man who wanted his lease renewed, and that nobody had ever complained, because to complain you must complain to the Duke. And there was no Duke, and there never had been, not in the way she meant. The old Duke's father used to walk down, she said. My grandmother remembers. He'd stand in the smithy and argue about a horse for an hour. But that was 60 years ago, Mr. Thorn, and the Thorns have been in London ever since. And if you have never been looked at by a man on a horse who has forgotten your face before he has finished looking, then I cannot explain it to you. She had glanced at him then, sideways. You will think me disloyal. No, said Adrian Thorn, with his own coat of arms in his pocket and his throat closed up. No, I do not think you disloyal. He wrote to his lawyers that night, from the Fleece, by a tallow candle, in a fury so cold and so exact that his hand did not shake once. And in the morning he did not go back to London. He stayed. He stayed 11 weeks, and he walked the valley in a plain brown coat. And he sat in the settle at the Fleece in the evenings and let men who did not know him tell him the truth about his own land. And he found the ford, and the roofs of Water Row, and old Ryder in his son's back kitchen, and Adrian sat on a stool in that kitchen for 2 hours, and let an old man cry in front of him about a cottage, and went out and stood in the yard afterwards and could not, for some time, see anything at all. And every Sunday he walked Susanna Bell home from evensong. That was the part he could not account for. The rest was duty. He could have written it in a report. The lane was not duty. The lane was 3/4 of a mile of wet March hedgerow, and the smell of hawthorn coming. And a young woman with lace-mender's eyes, spoiled early, she said, from working by a bad candle, who walked with her chin up and argued with him about the sermon, and laughed at him, actually laughed at him, when he was pompous, which nobody in England had done since he was 19. She said, on the 6th Sunday, "You are the strangest clerk I ever met." "Am I? You do not talk like a clerk. You talk like a man who has never once had to ask permission for anything." She said it lightly, and then, seeing his face, "I have offended you." "No," Adrian said. "You have described me." "Then who are you?" There it was, in the lane, in the last of the light, with the church bell still going behind them, and the mud and the hawthorn about to break. And Adrian Thorne, 9th Duke of Oakenshaw, who had never in his life been afraid of anything except this, looked at her and said, "A man who has done badly by people he never troubled to look at. I am trying to mend it." Susanna Bell looked back at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once as though he had passed some examination she had not told him he was sitting, and said, "Well, that is more than most," and walked on. He did not tell her. He was going to. He composed the sentence perhaps 400 times, in the settle at the Fleece, in the dark, at 3 in the morning. "My name is Adrian Thorne, and I am the Duke of Oakenshaw." It was 10 words. He had commanded a regiment of yeomanry and addressed the House of Lords and stood up at his brother's grave, and he could not say 9 words in a lane, because he knew, with the perfect clarity of a man who has spent his life being bowed to, precisely what would happen the instant he said them. The chin would come up, the face would close, and the thing that had happened between the church gate and the cottage door, that ridiculous, weightless, enormous thing that made a man of 36 look forward to a Sunday all week, that would be over. And something careful and dead would stand in its place, and she would call him Your Grace, and would never again in her life laugh at him for being pompous. So he'd not tell her. Sunday after Sunday, he did not tell her. Which was, as he had reason to reflect afterwards, the single most cowardly act of his life, and the price of it came due on the last Sunday in April, at 10 minutes past 6 in the evening, in front of the whole congregation of Oakenshaw Church. They heard it before they saw it. 4 horses coming fast up the village street, and the ring of a coachman's whip, and then the carriage swung round by the yew and pulled up at the lich gate in a spray of April mud, black and green and gold, with the arms of Oakenshaw blazing on the door panel, 2 footmen up behind in livery, and outriders. The congregation came out into the porch and stopped as one. Adrian was on the step with the hymn books in his hands. He knew, before the door opened, what was in the carriage. He had been expecting it for a week and had told himself, every day of that week, that he had another day. His man of business came out of it first, and then, because the woman was incapable of allowing anybody else to do anything, his aunt, Lady Amelia Thorne, in black bombazine and a travelling cloak, who came up the church path at a great rate, took one look at her nephew standing in a brown coat with a hymn book and a lace-mender's grandmother's basket at his feet, and said, in a voice that reached the back of the churchyard, "Oakenshaw, for the love of heaven, you have had all England looking for you for 2 months, and I find you handing out hymnals like a parish clerk. The Lord Lieutenant is at the hall. Get into the carriage." Nobody in that porch moved. The vicar's mouth was open. The blacksmith had gone the colour of his own forge. Adrian did not look his aunt. He was not, in fact, capable of looking at his aunt. He turned his head and looked at Susanna Bell, who was standing 3 feet away with her grandmother's arm through hers in a grey cloak, and who was looking at the coat of arms on the carriage door. He watched her read it. He watched her look at the crest, and then at the footman, and then at him, at the brown coat and the muddy boots and the hymn books, and he watched her put it together in about 2 seconds, because she was quick and had always been quick, and he had loved her for it. "Susanna," he said. She did not scream or weep or curtsy. She took her arm out of her grandmother's, and she said, quite steadily to the old woman, "Gran, we shall go the short way tonight. and then she looked at him for one last moment. 11 Sundays, said Susanna Bell. And she walked out through the lich gate, past the ducal carriage, past the footman who did not know whether to bow to her or not, and up the lane in the dusk, alone. And every soul in that churchyard watched her go, and then turned together and looked at their duke. He went after her, of course. He went that same night on foot, in the dark, and hammered on the cottage door like a fool, and the old woman opened it and said, "She'll not see you," with enormous satisfaction, and shut it. He went the next day and the day after. On the 4th day Susanna came out and stood in the doorway with her arms folded and said, "Say what you have come to say, your grace, and then go away, because Mrs. Pruitt across the road has been at that window for 3 days and my character is all I have got." Adrian took off his hat. He had thought about this for 4 nights, and he had nothing prepared at all. "I never lied to you," he said. "My name is Thorn. Do not." She said it very quietly, and it went through him like a bayonet. "Do not stand at my door and be clever. You knew exactly what I thought you were, and you let me think it every Sunday for 11 weeks. You sat in my grandmother's kitchen, you ate her bread, and she has not got bread to spare, whatever she tells you. You let me tell you about Mr. Vance and the shilling in the pound, and about old Ryder, and about the Duke who has never come to see us." Her voice did not rise. That was the terrible thing. It never rose. "And all the time you were the Duke. You were the man I was complaining to you about." "Yes," said Adrian. "Why?" "'Cause if I had told you," he said, "you would have stopped." "Stopped what?" "Telling me the truth." He turned the hat over in his hands. "I have had every man on this estate lie to me for 4 months, Susanna. Vance lies in a beautiful hand on good paper. The vicar lies out of kindness. My own steward's clerk told me in February that Water Row was in good repair. Do you know how a duke learns anything? He does not. That's the whole of it. Nobody has told me an unpleasant truth to my face since I was 19 years old. And I came down that lane behind you in the rain on the 1st Sunday in January and heard you say that the Duke had not troubled to come and see you. And it was the first honest word anyone had said about me in my hearing in 17 years. She was silent. "So I did not tell you," he said. "And then I did not tell you because I could not bear to, which is worse and is the truth, and I am not going to dress it up." He looked at her. "There is nothing I can say to make it right. I know that. I came to say that Vance was dismissed on Tuesday, and the accounts are with my lawyers, and there will be a prosecution. The bridge at Netherfold is contracted for. They begin on Monday. The 7 cottages in Water Row are to be re-roofed at my charge, and the rents put back to what they were in my father's time. And I have written to every tenant on this estate that any man who has paid a shilling in the pound to have his lease renewed may come to the estate office and be repaid it in full, with no questions and no consequences, and no need to prove it." Susanna Bell's arms came slowly down from being folded. "And old Ryder," said Adrian, "is in his own cottage again as of Thursday, with the rent forgiven for his life, and a pension of £30 a year, and he has told me to my face that is 60 years too late, and he is right." The lane was very quiet. Somewhere down at the ford a blackbird was making a great deal of noise about nothing. "Why are you telling me?" she said at last. "Because you told me," said Adrian, "every one of them. You told me, and nobody else would. And I want you to know that not one word of it was wasted, and that whatever happens between you and me, and I am aware that nothing may, and that I have earned that you have done more good in this valley in 11 Sundays than my family has done in 60 years. He put his hat on. "Good evening, Miss Bell," he said, and went away down the lane, and did not look back, because he had decided that if he looked back he would beg, and she had been given quite enough by great men who wanted something. Lady Amelia Thorne called upon Susanna Bell on the 15th of May. Adrian knew nothing of it for 6 days. He learned of it at last from his own housekeeper, who had it from the woman who brought the eggs, and who told him because, as she said afterwards to the kitchen, he had a right to know what was being done in his name. And she had seen his face at the church that Sunday, and she was not made of stone. His aunt had gone in the carriage. She had gone into the cottage. She had told Susanna Bell, kindly and reasonably and at some length, that a great house cannot be built upon a lace-mender. That the girl was doubtless a very good sort of person, that people would say she had trapped him, and would say it for 40 years, and would say it in front of her, that any child of such a marriage would be sneered at from the cradle. And then she had put on the table, in that cottage, £400 in notes, and had said that Miss Bell would find a situation in Bath very easily arranged. Adrian Thorne went into his aunt's morning room without knocking. "What did she say?" he said. Lady Amelia looked up. She had, he noticed with a certain grim interest, gone rather grey about the mouth. She said, his aunt replied, that she would take the money on one condition. "What condition?" "That I should count it out onto the table in front of her grandmother," said Lady Amelia, "who is stone deaf and cannot understand a word that is said in this world, and who has never in her life seen £400, and that I should the old woman in the face while I did it, and then explain to her, in writing on paper, in my own hand, precisely what I was paying for." There was a pause. "And," said Adrian. "I did not do it," said his aunt. "No," he said. "I did not think you would." He turned to go. "Adrian." Lady Amelia's voice, for the first time in his memory, was not entirely steady. "She did not take the money. She did not take a penny of it. And she said one other thing, and you had better have it, 'cause I shall not repeat it twice." He stopped at the door. She said, "Tell him I never wanted the Duke. Tell him I wanted Mr. Thorne, and Mr. Thorne is a liar, and I am too old and too poor to be lied to twice, and that is the whole of my answer, and he may have it, and I hope he is very happy." His aunt looked down at her hands. And then she went back to her window, and picked up her needle, and went on with her work while I let myself out. The estate office at Oakenshaw opened for the repayments on the first Monday in June, and Adrian sat in it himself, from 9 in the morning until 7 at night, for 4 days. His lawyers had begged him not to. It was not, they said, a thing a duke did. There were clerks for it. His presence would embarrass the tenants and expose him to imposition, and half the men who came would be lying. "Then they will lie to my face," said Adrian, "which is a novelty, and I shall have to bear it." 91 men came. Some of them came with the receipts kept in a tin, or a Bible, or folded into the lining of a hat for 4 years. Most came with nothing at all but a name and a date and a colour in their faces that Adrian had not understood before that week and never afterwards forgot. The particular shame of an honest man obliged to say aloud, to the son of the family he has served all his life, that he paid a bribe to keep a roof over his wife. Adrian repaid every one of them. He did not question a single claim. On the 3rd day his lawyer laid a note on the desk saying that in his professional judgment at least 11 of the sums were exaggerated, and Adrian read it, and folded it, and put it in the fire and went on writing. He learned things in those 4 days that no ledger would ever have told him. He learned that the roofs of Water Row had been sold, the good slate, taken off in the night and sold at Ashby, and pantiles put on that let the weather through in a fortnight. He learned that Vance had a brother-in-law in the lace trade at Netherfold, and at the warehouse there had cut its rate from 9p a yard to 7p in the year the cottage rents went up, and that the women of 11 villages had simply absorbed it, as women do, in less bread. 7p a yard. He sat at his own desk with the ledger open in front of him and did the sum, and the sum said that Susanna Bell had been sitting at a bad window for 10 hours a day, going blind by inches, so that a thief could keep a gig. He put his head in his hands, and his lawyer, who was a decent man, went out and shut the door. On the Thursday old Ryder came. He came not for money. He had never paid Vance a penny, he said, because he had never had a penny to pay him with, but because he had heard that the Duke was sitting in the office like a common clerk, and he wanted to see it, and at 84 he was past caring what anybody thought of him. He sat down without being asked. He looked round at the papers and the tin boxes, and the great man in a brown coat with ink on his cuff. "You'll want to know about the lass," he said. Adrian put down his pen. "I want," he said carefully, "to know that she is well. That is all I have any right to." "She's not well," said Ryder. "She's working. Same thing in this valley." He turned his hat round in his hands. "Your Grace, I've been 60 year on this land, and I was turned off it at Christmas, and you've put me back, and I'll not forget it. So I'll say a thing to you that nobody else in Oakenshaw will say, and you may throw me out of your office for it. Say it." "You want to go down that lane," said the old man. "You've wanted to go down it every day for 6 weeks. I've seen you stood at the top of it. And you're a duke, so when you go you'll take something, a purse or a place for her gran or a house or a fine speech. You'll take something, because your sort can't come empty-handed, it's not in you. He fixed Adrian with a pale, unblinking farmer's eye. Don't. She's had every man in her life come to her with a price on him. The warehouse, the rent man, your aunt, God forgive her, with £400 on the table. You go now with your hands full, you'll just be the last one and the biggest one, and she'll shut the door, and she'll be right too. The room was very quiet. Then what? Said Adrian, and his voice was not quite steady. Would you have me do? Nout, said Ryder. Do your work. Mend the roofs and hang the thief and build the bridge, and do it whether she ever speaks to you again or not, because if you'd only do it to buy her, then you're no better than Vance, and she'd smell it on you at 40 yards. He stood up slowly on 2 bad knees. And when it's done, and when you've stopped wanting to be thanked for it, then go to church, your grace, same seat, same coat, and wait. Adrian Thorne stood up too in his own estate office and shook the hand of a hedger who could not write his own nong, he said. Old Ryder considered. How long did you let her think you were a clerk? 11 Sundays. Ay, well, said the old man and put on his hat. There you are then. He did not go to her. That was the hardest thing he had ever done, and he did it for 11 weeks, which was 1 week for every Sunday he had lied to her. He set it himself like a sentence, and he served it. He worked instead. He worked as he had never worked at anything. The bridge, the roofs, the accounts, the prosecution of Vance, the school at Netherfold that had been promised in his grandfather's time and never built. He walked the valley, in the brown coat, because the tenants had made it perfectly plain that they preferred him in it, and because his aunt hated it. He learned 400 names. He stood in the smithy and argued about a horse for an hour, and the smith, who had been terrified of him in May, called him a fool in June and went scarlet, and Adrian laughed until he had to sit down on the mounting block. And on the 11th Sunday at the end of July, the Duke of Oakenshaw walked down to the village church for evensong on foot alone, in a plain brown coat, and sat at the back in the place he had sat in January. The whole congregation saw him. Nobody said anything. The vicar preached, badly, for 35 minutes, on the parable of the lost sheep, and got through it entirely by looking at the roof, and afterwards, in the porch, Adrian Thorne stood with his hat in his hands and waited while the church emptied, until there was nobody left in it but an old deaf woman gathering up her shawl, and her granddaughter in a grey cloak, standing quite still in the aisle with her hymn book in her hand, looking at him. Miss Bell, he said. Your Grace. Adrian, he said. It is my name. It is the only one of them that is any use to me now. She did not answer. I have come to ask you a favour, he said, and it is not the one you think, and I shall not ask you for that one. Not tonight, not ever, unless you tell me to. His hands were not steady on the brim of the hat, and he did not attempt to hide it. I should like to walk you home. Susanna Bell looked at him for a long, long moment in the dim church. It is 3/4 of a mile, she said. I know exactly how far it is, said Adrian Thorne. They walked in silence as far as the ford. The hawthorn was over. The hedges were deep and dusty and full of July, and the light was going in long gold bars over the Oakenshaw valley, and the old woman went ahead of them at her own pace with her basket, because she had eyes in her head, deaf or not. At the ford, Susanna stopped. The bridge is up, she said. On Tuesday. They are calling it Bell's Bridge in the village. Her voice was flat. Did you do that? No, said Adrian. I heard it and I did not contradict it, which I dare say is the same sin as the last one, and you may add it to the account. And Susanna Bell put her hand over her mouth and made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the other thing. You are impossible, she says. Do you know what you did to me? She turned on him in the lane, and her face was working, and she let it. It was not the lie. I have been lied to before. I am a lace-mender. Half of what I mend is a lie. It is that for 11 Sundays I had a friend. One friend in my whole life who came for nothing, who was not my grandmother's neighbour, or the vicar being kind, or a man from the lace warehouse who wanted the work done quicker. Somebody who walked 3/4 of a mile in the mud to argue with me about a sermon, because he liked to. Her voice broke, and then a carriage came, and it was all a piece of business. It was a duke going about among his people to find out about drains. No, said Adrian. You came for the drains. I came for the drains in January, he said. By the first week in February I was coming for you, and I knew it. And I told myself for 11 weeks that a duke who has been on this earth 36 years, and has never once been laughed at for being pompous, was entitled to keep 1 hour a week, and that when I told you it would end, and I could not, he stopped. He started again. Susanna. Every good thing that has been done in this valley since April was done because you told me the truth in a lane. That is not business. I have not been able to look at a hedge or a roof or a bridge since May without hearing your voice. I dismissed a thief and I built a bridge. And I put an old man back in his cottage, and every one of them I did as though you were standing at my elbow watching me do it, because it turns out, madam, that you are the only person whose opinion of me I have ever cared about in my life. And I did not find that out until you took your arm out of your grandmother's and walked away from me through that gate. The blackbird had started up again down at the water. Neither of them heard it. I am not asking you to be a duchess, said Adrian Thorn. You have told me what you want. You want Mr. Thorn, and Mr. Thorn is a liar. Very well. Then let him be a liar who spends the next 40 years telling you the truth, and let him start now. I love you. I have loved you since the second Sunday, when you carried a basket in one hand and your grandmother in the other, and would not let me help until I had asked twice. I do not want a great marriage. I want to be walked home from church. I want to be laughed at. I want you. His voice went entirely. And if you will not have me, I shall go on mending this valley until I die, because you were right about all of it, and I shall never once blame you. And I shall come to this church every Sunday for the rest of my life and sit at the back and be very glad to see you there. That is the whole of it. That is everything I have got. Susanna Bell stood in the lane in her grey cloak with her hymn book pressed against her chest. 11 weeks, she said, you did not come. You told my aunt you were too old and too poor to be lied to twice. I thought, said Adrian, that you were owed a Sunday for every Sunday. She began to cry then, and she was furious about it, and she wiped her face with the back of her wrist like a child and glared at him and said, you counted them. Of course I counted them. You are the most. She stopped. She looked down at the hymn book and then up the lane, where her grandmother had stopped at the gate and turned round and was standing there in the last of the gold light, watching them both with an expression of vast, deaf, unashamed interest. Gran has been saying since May, said Susanna unsteadily, that a man who walks 3/4 of a mile in the rain 11 times does not do it for the drains. Your grandmother, said Adrian, is the wisest woman in this county. She cannot hear a word we are saying. She has not needed to hear a word we have said since the second Sunday in January, said the Duke of Oakenshaw, and he held out his hand, open, palm up, in a wet lane, offering nothing that could be counted or settled or written down, and he waited. And Susanna Bell, lace-mender of Oakenshaw village, 24 years old and worth, by every account that the world keeps, nothing whatsoever, put her hand into his. They were married in the little church at Oakenshaw on the last Saturday in September, and the whole valley came, and the vicar preached for 6 minutes, which the blacksmith afterwards described as the finest sermon of his life. Lady Amelia Thorne came too. She had, in the end, made herself useful. She had a hard, clear head, and she had put it entirely at Susanna's disposal on one condition, which she stated in writing, that neither of them should ever mention the money to her again as long as she lived. Adrian did not. Susanna once, on a bad day in the second winter, when the county had been especially vile, went and sat with the old woman for an hour and said nothing about it at all, and Lady Amelia understood perfectly, and they became, slowly, and against everybody's expectation, including their own, very good friends. The carriage was waiting at the lit gate after the wedding, black and green and gold, with the arms of Oakenshaw blazing on the door. Adrian looked at it. Then he looked at his wife in her grey cloak, which she had insisted upon, over a gown of white silk which she had insisted upon rather less. It is 3/4 of a mile, he said. I know exactly how far it is, said the Duchess of Oakenshaw. So they walked out of the lit gate and up the lane in the September dusk, in the smell of the cut fields, with the whole village pouring after them and the bells going behind. and the great empty carriage rolling slowly along at a respectful distance the entire way, because the coachman did not dare do anything else, and because, as Adrian Thorne observed, with his wife's arm through his and her head against his shoulder, a man ought to be walked home from church by somebody who knows exactly who he is.